I feel like diet culture sets you up to never be good enough.
Did you burn 500 calories on the treadmill today? No? Me either.
I mean, anybody can sit with us. We're just really not about diet culture.
But literally, happiness doesn't come from a low-calorie, high-intensity life. I actually do like carrots.
I do too. They're my favorite.
Welcome to the Fit Fueled Free podcast.
So basically, diets suck.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 58. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Jenna.
And we're super excited to be back. Thank you for your patience. I have been on a pretty big adventure in our absence of recording, and we did, I think Jenna actually was the one that posted for me on Instagram that I took a job in Colorado. So I'm fully an eating disorder dietitian now, working at a treatment center, which is obviously very aligned with my passion. So I'm stoked for that. But we packed up in a couple weeks and drove out to Colorado. So it was a whirlwind. Jenna and Landon helped to pack us up in the truck. So that was super awesome and also very sad at the same time. But yeah, we're out here. We really like it. We're renting a home. Sawyer went for his first hike, which was exciting, like baby's first steps kind of thing. And we've been enjoying lots of delicious takeout. We've barely eaten in any restaurants just because it's a little bit intense here with COVID. And so just trying to make it easier on everyone eating more at home. But it's been good so far. Crazy, but very good. So yeah, that's what's been going on here. And I'm also recording from my closet so anyone who watches this on YouTube will see, because I'm thinking this is going to be the most optimal place for sound quality in the super old house that we're renting.
That's awesome. Do you want me to give a little update?
Yeah, what's been up with you?
Okay. Lots has been going on. We are kind of looking to buy a house. Which is crazy. It feels like that would be, we had like our first quote unquote adult purchase back in August with our like first massive couch, which by the way, still has not come in. It's supposed to come in on Friday, but I'm not holding my breath for that. But, really just want this freaking couch. But other than that, we're looking potentially to maybe buy a house. Nothing like set in stone. We're like, haven't even found the house yet, but the fact that we're like kind of intentionally looking is nuts and exciting. So that's really kind of it since last time we chatted on here.
And we're going to pick right back up with our intuitive eating mini series. So we only got the first principle out before everything happened with the move. So today's episode is going to be on the second intuitive eating principle, which is honor your hunger. So just like we did last episode, I'm going to read the brief synopsis of what this chapter is about. So keep your body biologically fed with adequate energy and carbohydrates. Otherwise, you can trigger a primal drive to overeat. Once you reach the moment of excessive hunger, all intentions of moderate, conscious eating are fleeting and irrelevant. Learning to honor this first biological signal sets the stage for rebuilding trust in yourself and in food. So again, I think just that brief synopsis really touches on some important points there. I think it's kind of paradoxical because in our culture, it's like hunger is such a negative thing, but by denying our hunger, we're actually causing so many of these problems, quote unquote, that can feel so out of control and just so negative for us in our relationship with food and our bodies.
Yeah, I really actually liked in this chapter specifically that it talked about how just what you said, like our culture basically like makes us feel shame and like guilt for feeling hunger, but it actually is like a good thing. And it's something that like we've been created. It's like an alert and an alarm system that like our bodies were innately given to like let us know like when it's time to like fuel and like take care of ourselves. And if you can kind of like reframe that mentality, that can really help start to change the way you think about hunger and food, and being able to actually honor those cues that your body is giving you.
Yeah, when we kind of can take that step back and look at it as just what it is rather
Yeah.
than what we've made it out to be. So being a little bit more objective about it can be, it's going to probably be a fleeting thought, but something good to reflect on, I think, in any part of really how our bodies actually are biologically working.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess also I want to give this quick disclaimer, like we did last time, that this episode is for informational and educational purposes only, not for individual advice. Jenna and myself are not certified intuitive eating counselors, but we use intuitive eating both in our personal lives and in our career field. So becoming a certified eating disorder dietitian is on the table for me. And you guys know that that's both what we both really do encourage as our end goal. So we also recommend the workbook that goes along with intuitive eating because it has some really great tangible activities to do just on your own outside of the things that we're discussing of how we've been able to implement these things and what we would recommend to someone as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the Minnesota starvation study?
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's start with that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, this is a huge study that gets brought up for anyone who is not familiar with this. I really suggest that you just like do a quick Google search. I went on a ton of different websites because I was making sure that all the information seemed to be about the same, and it like you can get a general synopsis of it, but it was done by Ansel Keys in the 40s, I believe, because they wanted to see how they could refeed soldiers coming back from war. So they picked 36 men for this and fed them for 3 months at around 3,200 calories per day, which was a comfortable amount for them. I don't know their heights and weights off the top of my head, but that was just like an average amount of food for an active man. And then they cut the calories about in half after those first 3 months to about 1,570 for the duration of the next 6 months.
Which is insane because that 1570 number is like even higher than what a lot of people go on now, like with restrictive diets.
Yeah, it's actually really like striking to see that in print that because really anytime you log into any kind of calorie tracking app, which is not something that we recommend, again, other than to make sure you're eating enough food, it's going to recommend these atrocious numbers. And to think, I mean, this is really the only true study that showed the effects of starvation in a human, because this would never like ethically be allowed to happen in today's time. But it is like you can't get better information than this, which is why I think it's such a important study that comes up in the eating disorder world. So the reason that this is so important, other than just like the interesting facts about it, is that diet culture, yes, definitely started taking hold like even in the 1400s. I learned that recently, but for what we know it today of like having social media and just like the magazines and everything like that, like the rampant, the fashion models, like everything like that, that rampant information, like obviously is very different. Even like our age people will say like we can't imagine growing up in today because of how different things are, just with like the access to the negative parts of our culture. So all that being said is that didn't exist. And when these men were essentially starved at this what we would call super reasonable calorie level, they started exhibiting the signs and symptoms of eating disorders or disordered eating. And so we often blame society on causing eating disorders, but this study really backs up, it definitely plays a part, but like if you're like biologically, that's really going to happen. Like not everyone is going to get an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of like showed you the things that can happen just completely isolated in restriction.
Yeah.
So
Want to cover really quickly like what the studies showed that happened?
So eating became the prime topic of discussion. There was a lot of food rituals that developed, things like eating gum to stave off hunger, mixing foods in different ways, just the pacing of meals would change. They also noticed the men became apathetic, loss of sex drive, and extremely lethargic because they also had to complete a certain amount of physical activity every day. They weren't just sedentary. So again, typically what we would do in our weight loss culture. Which is terrifying. So yeah, it's just a lot of like classic things that happen when somebody's body is malnourished, whether it's because of an eating disorder, purposeful weight loss, or, you know, some kind of other illness. But like that is all consistent with what we know today to happen to people who restrict their food too low for their body. And these particular men did, most of the pictures that you can find, they did have an emaciated appearance. But again, that isn't always what happens for someone for cutting calories down. They're not always going to appear with that typical emaciated look that we think of with restriction.
Yeah.
Something interesting that when I was researching this a little bit deeper for the episode, I came across this follow-up study that was done when these men were in their 80s, and they were talking about this one particular part where in the moment they still were doing a lot of their like schoolwork and just like mentally they were powering through, but when they reflected back on this time, they reported like really poor cognition and like struggle mentally. And I think that's also really important to note because it's really easy to like pretend you're fine under circumstances like this. And then like backwards reflection on it, you know, hindsight's 2020, we tend to realize we actually weren't doing so hot. And so that was of interest as well, that it wasn't reported in the beginning, which is very typical of a lot of eating disorder behaviors.
Yeah, which it's interesting you say that because I literally just had a conversation with someone the other weekend about something very similar. And I was saying how now looking back on the time period of my life where I was significantly under eating and like was incredibly small, that I literally like didn't have the capability to like give in like relationships. Like I was so like mentally and emotionally so consumed with all that, but also like looking back, I was like, I like literally like didn't have like, it's like my brain like wasn't working at full capacity. Like I was so like, I physically could not engage in certain ways and like be this like my full self, which is very similar to what you just said about these men, how they looking back, they were like cognitively like I wasn't all there. And I was like, that's so true. But you either don't realize it, don't address it at the time, or you like put a show on to be like, I'm fine, there's not a problem.
Yeah.
And in reality, it's like there's a pretty big problem.
Yeah. I heard I'm like learning at an insane pace right now because of being thrown into like full-blown eating disorder world. And I heard an explanation recently because when there's that appearance of someone being just very like cognitively full functioning, like the amount of difficult things that they have to handle has like narrowed because your focus becomes so narrowed in on your food and on your movement and on your body image that like you become really good at just like a small handful of things. Where it can seem perfectly normal, but really we know that that's what's taking up the majority of your brain space. I think that's important to distinguish. And even outside of someone with a full-blown eating disorder, the number of like times that I had people wanting to lose weight, having conversations with me, like their thoughts, like it had that same like pervasiveness, or perseverance, excuse me. I guess they both apply actually, but just the rigid thinking and just like stuck on the same things, like worried about. Yeah. So it's just so interesting because I know there are so many people who believe like intentional weight loss is perfectly safe and fine, but just like I really have never witnessed that without it impacting someone, whether it's turning into a full-blown eating disorder, which doesn't always come out of like intentional weight loss necessarily, but oftentimes that's associated. And then like just someone that's trying to lose weight and like the way they become obsessed with it, they very much like in isolation too. It happens for someone losing weight, and they talk about that in this chapter as well. I think a little bit later on, but that's very like, that's not good. That's a very negative side effect. When you become too afraid to be able to interact, or like these men, some of them got kicked out because they were like stealing food and breaking the diet because they literally couldn't contain themselves because their bodies were, you know, begging for food. So this study wraps up with 3 months of the refeeding process. And a lot of the reporting from that was loss of control during refeeding, which is totally normal because you're like, you get used to eating that smaller amount and then it feels wrong to eat more. Binge eating. And again, this isn't in every single person. If you look it up, you can see the statistics on how many out of the 36 men, or I think it ended up being 32 in the end, that were went all the way through that experienced this stuff. And then remarkably, some of them took up to 2 years to fully regain their strength, which is a very long time for 6 months of restriction. So yeah, that is a important and terrifying study, and just interesting because again, kind of looking at the facts of like the risks and side effects of the restriction that we put ourselves through, and for the eating disorder world. Like how striking this was, that like it is our biology, it isolated from body image, like just our brain's ability to, you know, unlock that disorder. We'll segue into the fact that regarding hunger, food insecurity and food scarcity is considered to be a form of trauma on the body. So that can make hunger a really scary feeling if you've ever been without food. So we've talked about this before. That doesn't have to be because like financially or like geographically or like whatever, you don't have access to food. It can also be because like you've made it mentally like scarce. Which is, you know, why dieting is considered a trauma on the body, because you're depriving yourself of a physiological need.
Basic need.
Like that's one of Maslow's hierarchies. Like it's right there at the bottom. We need food. So I heard that a lot from people as an outpatient dietitian, and I'm sure you can speak to this too, Jenna, but just like how often people are, I think you've specifically like asked me questions that people have asked you about hunger, but like it becomes this really negative thing. Like people are like, oh, I'm hungry. And like, how can I avoid the hunger? Like at all costs is kind of what it becomes. And then essentially that's going to become a very cyclical problem, because if you're trying to stave off that hunger or ignore the hunger, it's going to get louder. And then you're going to feel more out of control. And then you're going to want to try and again, stave the hunger, ignore it. And that can happen every single day for people who are trying to diet after a certain point, like when you hit that breaking point. And that's definitely something that's apparent with eating disorders.
Yeah. And I think like I know personally with people that I've worked with, and I'm sure you've seen it too, it's like the people that you're walking through this with, like when they're in the thick of it, it's like because they're denying it so much, it almost becomes like an obsession. And it's like, depending on the person, but a lot of times I found at least like it's all that they talk about. And
Yeah.
so, it's I like there's a very distinct difference between like enjoying food and like being obsessed with it. And I think like if any listeners out there, like you're trying to figure out like, because I feel like for the most part, people probably know like whether or not they're consciously ignoring their hunger, but there's probably that fine line as well with like this whole diet culture of like people being like, oh no, I honor my body, but also like on the back end of that, there's still like little moments in time where they're like, I'm going to ignore this and like ignore like my biological need and stuff. And so I think it would be a really important assessment to kind of like ask yourself like, okay, am I like, what, like, do I enjoy food or like, am I obsessing over it? Because I know like, even for like myself, like years ago, like it's all I thought about. It's all I looked at on Instagram for a time frame, like just looking at people's food pictures. And granted, like there are some beautiful pictures of like that food bloggers will post that like is enjoyable to look at. But like, I think when it becomes like this like overwhelming obsession, that could kind of be like a little like light bulb or like a little like, you know, nudge to be like, hey, like this obsession might be because you're actually denying this. And so typically you find that when people start to heal their relationship with food and like start to honor their hunger, like you'll hear them say like, I don't think about it all the time anymore. Like, it's not like, oh, what am I going to eat next? What am I going to have tomorrow when I wake up? Like, what am I going to make for lunch? Like, granted, like, yes, there are times where you're like, like, what am I going to have? But it's not this like constant, like, you know, rerun in your head of like, when can I eat? What am I going to eat? And like really truly obsessing over the little intricate details of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That I always reflect back to my my hardcore Pinterest days, because I feel like that just was like such a problematic root of my disorder. Like how long and how many hours I would spend on Pinterest looking for recipes. And I certainly like I'm a foodie like till I die.
Yeah.
But like I do not care that much about it. And that's funny that you point that out, because like I can totally see that in, you know, past Danielle behaviors, and also always following like the clean eats quote unquote people on Instagram. That became like the new thing. Because I think probably deep down inside, all I really wanted was just to be able to like eat whatever the heck I wanted. And like, don't get me wrong, like I really do enjoy a variety of food, but when you've like labeled your foods as what's good and bad and what's off limits, then I think I was looking for this like next greatest recipe to like be this magical delicious thing. And that's what they promise too. Anyone who that's what like now I can like totally tell people who are like functioning in diet culture and like disordered thinking, it's because the way that they talk about diet-y foods, like, and I'm not talking about like if you have a reason that you have like an allergen or you have to avoid something for whatever reason. I'm not like picking on those people, but I think we can all think of someone that we've seen recently that like very specifically was bragging about how good this food that fit in some specific diet tasted like. And it's like, okay, like why aren't we allowed to just eat like the natural version of this, like and not for any reason like natural is better, but just like it's just like the original recipe of this food, like what was wrong with that kind of thing, you know what I mean? It's funny to like think about that. So I definitely still use those resources for recipe like inspiration, but it's just not, it doesn't feel the same like obsessive like manner.
Like I have to only eat a brownie that is made with like black beans as opposed to regular mix or flour or whatever. I don't even know what you make brownies in, but you know what I mean? Like there's not an obsession to be like, oh, I have to have the healthy air quote or like clean version of this.
And so if you're stuck in that thinking, we don't expect you to just like, you know, snap your fingers and magically be on the other side of it. That's the work. But just, I think hearing that is helpful. At least that's always been helpful for me, is to hear like that can transition, that like questioning those things, poke holes in the theories that you think you know, what you know about nutrition and health. And then that's how you can start to move towards honoring your hunger, which is like the whole concept of this episode.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Want to talk about carbs really quick?
Yeah.
Because they talked about that in.
Yes. So we know, hopefully, that carbs are our primary source of fuel, especially for our brain. Yep. And so when we deprive ourselves of carbohydrates, which is very popular, we crave them more. Yeah. Because we needed them in the first place. And so there's a big plot hole in the idea of restricting carbohydrates, ending up in some like miraculous, like people will say they feel addicted to certain carbohydrates, or, you know, that weight loss goal. So this book explained it a little bit more scientifically, which is really cool. So they talked about the neuropeptide Y, which is a chemical our brain produces to get energy from carbs. So I think it's been studied more in rats, but there's some promising evidence that that's the same function for us. And researchers have also found that our cells are going to ask for that too. So once they don't have it on that cellular level, they are asking, our body is literally asking for it in multiple places. And I think that's really important to look at too, because we often think of carbohydrates being a weakness. Yeah. Like if you crave carbs, that's something else I hear all the time. Like people will just randomly say it like out of nowhere. Like, oh yeah, like I was bad because I ate pasta, or like I ate bread, or like I can't have that because then I won't be able to stop. And it's like that whole, and that's just like rampant. Yep. And so just knowing, like, I don't care what argument you have, like that is a fact. And also the idea that we can utilize other nutrients for carbohydrate replacement fuel, like yes, to a certain extent, but you also will experience protein wasting. Yes. And so the idea that you can just eat protein and like get completely sure, like you will lose protein. And that's why like especially rapid weight loss is so dangerous, is because we can lose like muscle around our heart. Yeah. Like your body doesn't give an F about where you want to lose. Like if you make your body lose weight, just like it doesn't pick necessarily like where it's going to come off first. So like you can't choose that. And so just, you know, I hate to use scare tactics, like I always say that, but that is terrifying, because when it gets down to, if you end up with a full-blown eating disorder and your body is wasting away, like people die of heart failure, like because of that. So like that is a problem. And you know, it's easy to think like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, restrict carbs for a little bit until I get to my goal weight. But like, except for that, you know, small percentage, it's gonna be cyclical. Yep. And it's gonna get, you know, worse for you and your body every single time that you go through that. Yeah. And most people like believe that if they're depriving their bodies of carbs and energy, like that's the point when their body is gonna start finally burning fat. And it's really just not the case. Like, just like you said with like the protein tissue, like that's where our body starts to pull the energy from. And like for reference with that, with each pound of like body protein, 3 to 4 pounds of associated water is lost as well. So it's not like people on these like low carb diets, like, you know, rave and praise the diet because they're like, oh, I've lost weight so quickly, I'm losing so much fat. But it's like, well, in reality, your body's pulling from protein and it's actually like water that you're losing. And it's not necessarily as much fat as you're thinking. So the second you go off that low carb diet, because it's typically not maintainable for people, just like it's a rebound and then it
becomes this vicious cycle, and you're working against your body until you finally decide to break the diet cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And it always, like, everyone always experiences this sense of like personal failure from that. And again, why I love coming back to like when you're ready to have this conversation and think about it like just biology, because just because you set your mind to something, sure, that may work. And also I like am torn on this, the whole like you can do whatever you set your mind to, because I think like a lot of things impact that anyway. But you can't just set your mind to like making your body biologically change. It will adapt because our bodies are like magnificent.
Yeah.
But you can't just like say, if I just have the willpower to not eat these carbs, like literally that won't work. I'm sure there are some people that prefer other, like we've talked about, like slightly varied styles of eating. As far as like exactly if you were to plate your ideal plate for energy, we probably all have a little bit different, but like overall we know that the carbs are helping us, and like we know what happens when we restrict them. It's like, and that also matters too in like people with PCOS and diabetes, or like just overall insulin resistance. That idea of just restricting, that's actually worse because your body is already battling maintaining your blood sugar, and so then to add this like restriction and these cravings, like
stress.
Yeah, they specifically talk about that in this chapter, like evidence that people who listen to their hunger tend to have better maintain blood sugar levels. So I love that about all the studies that have been done with intuitive eating that really like debunk the concerns that like this is just some all you can eat buffet, you've lost control and you don't care about your health, because it's literally the opposite. It's just super terrifying because of our culture.
Yeah. And I think it also, like the whole denying your hunger, it's two-part and like twofold, because it can spin into a period of overeating, but also like when you become so accustomed to ignoring these hunger cues, they begin to fade, and then you no longer hear them, or the only time you can hear them is when you're in like extreme ravenous states, and that's the only way that you know. And at that point, you're past the point of no return, because like there's no middle ground. You're just ravenous, and you can't be in tune with your like hunger cues at that point anyways, because your body is like, I just need energy. But like this waterfalls into the idea that you cannot be like you can't trust yourself with food, because this cycle of eating will trigger like binging or overeating, and then it just further perpetuates the issue, because you're losing trust. You're like, oh, well, see, I told myself, like, if I allow myself to eat what I want, I'm never going to stop. And it's like, well, the only reason you feel like you're never going to stop is because you're only allowing yourself to eat when you're past the point of like normal hunger. And of course, your body's going to do whatever it can to get you energy as quickly as possible, because its main job is to keep you alive, and you need food and energy to live.
Yeah. And you may experience a period of like feeling fully out of control until your body kind of realizes that like, oh, she's or he's going to feed me, or they are going to feed me regularly again.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that.
That's totally normal to like experience that, like, especially if you're doing it more on your own. Like if you're, you know, reading through this book or just listening to our podcast and you're not working with someone one-on-one on it, like that can feel super scary. Because you are going to feel things that you weren't feeling before, and that is like totally valid and normal. But just like buckling in and trying to get comfortable with being uncomfortable is probably, you know, that's a very vague thing, but it is literally like imperative to being allowed, like allowing yourself to trust your body again, in that you can, it's varying levels of how long it takes to repair this. Like you can get back, for the majority of people, in tune to your body's like natural cues. So do you want to get into some like tangible things that you can do to help with honoring hunger?
Action items.
Yes.
So I talked about this before in multiple episodes, but I think one of the places that could be good to start is keep a journal. every time that you eat, anytime you're about to eat, anytime you finish eating, literally writing how you feel before, during, and after, because sometimes like if you just rush through a meal, you're not really tuning into like what your body wants. You're not tuning into like your level of fullness, but like by you consciously like taking the time to tune into like where you're at before you eat, where you're at during, and where you're at after, you can like visually see like on paper like your emotions and what you're feeling. And at least for me, I know everybody like learns and absorbs information differently, so this may not work for everyone, but for people who are like visual learners, like just to see like you writing down your feelings and like how what your body was doing can kind of like reestablish those cues, so that way you can get to a place where you don't need to write it down, you just kind of know.
Yeah. I always love doing hunger scales with people because like when it's time for that, because everyone seems to experience it in a slightly different way. And so I am like 99% sure we went through like this step by step in a previous episode. But it's worth reiterating because as you evolve in like different phases of life and in like your recovery and healing journey, I think you're gonna experience things a little bit differently anyway as you become more in tune with your body. But if you can think like scale of 1 to 10, 10 is like ravenous, like I'm about to pass out from hunger, and 0 is like you're stuffed because you maybe just ate something, you have 0 hunger at all, or it could be a 1. Like, where do you typically allow yourself to get hungry? Or excuse me, where do you typically allow yourself to eat? Like what point on the scale? And so often, like we've talked about, I hear this feedback of, oh, like an 8 or a 9. And it's like, like let's reel that in. What do you feel in your body when you're more like a 5 or a 6? Because that's when like you should probably start listening. And it's hard, the majority of times it's hard to like associate that with something, but I love hearing the feedback of what someone felt in their own body, because it's not meant to be just this like exact equal perfect thing. It's your experience, and it might not even have anything to do with your stomach that first tells you you're starting to get hungry. And when you start to, like you said, like identify how you're feeling, and then you can put like even a number to that in addition to your feelings, I think you have like the best possible information to be able to start practicing. Like, okay, if you're not allowing yourself to eat till an 8 or a 9 because you're super busy, because you're terrified of eating, because you have a full-blown eating disorder, like whatever the reason is, if you can, okay, like maybe I'm allow myself to eat at a 7, like listen to my body. What do I feel before I get to that point where I have a raging headache and I feel faint? And then let yourself eat then, regardless of the time of day it is.
Yeah, like the book, I have it open right now, and it gives like a list of kind of symptoms. I'm going to read them off really quick because I think this can be beneficial. It says any combination of the following can be experienced as hunger sensations or symptoms ranging from gentle to ravenous: mind gurgling or gnawing in the stomach, growling noises, lightheadedness, difficulty concentrating, uncomfortable stomach pain, irritability, feeling faint, and headache. And obviously, like things such as feeling faint, like you don't want to let yourself get to that point. Like you want to notice maybe like, oh, my stomach's growling, or I'm not able to concentrate as well, or like, oh, I'm thinking about food. Usually like if you're like not obsessing over it, but if you like realize like, oh, I'm starting to think about like, when can I eat lunch, or like, what am I going to have? That's usually typically an early sign of like, oh, like my body is starting to get ready. Like it's starting to get ready for food and I'm like hungry.
Yeah. I think like for me growing up, hunger meant I had to have like pangs in my stomach. And then as an adult, realizing if I start to feel like really cranky or hangry, I've gone too long without eating. It's like trying to prevent that from happening by eating regularly throughout the day. And so that part might actually have to come first before really being able to listen, is that period of like eating every so many hours. So the book says every like 5. I think that's a bit far
Yeah.
because if you, and not knocking them, like these dietitians are amazing, but like in practice, I would say more like 2 to 4 hours,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if you're somebody who notices their blood sugar goes up and down more. Like you start to feel like that shakiness or something in a few hours, like
Yeah.
you need to be eating
Yeah.
more regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the book said like I took it as like the rule of thumb, like if you're so far removed from your hunger, like never go past 5 hours. Like 5 should really be like the max amount of
Okay.
time, just because like in terms of like fueling up your carb tank, like in your liver, like that runs out like every 3 to 6 hours or so. So like you really should be eating within that time frame, which I agree with you. I like your like 2 to 4 better than waiting till 5. That just seems a little bit of a long period of time.
Yeah. And like I've met a few people who only eat 3 times a day, and that's like good for them. I think just be honest with yourself. Like, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have schedules that don't allow for us to
Yeah.
fuel as often as possible. So
Yeah.
you might have to get used to like
Mhm.
eating a larger breakfast
Yeah.
and lunch to like make up for that. Because otherwise, even if you eat something, if you're just eating like a piece of fruit for breakfast, you are going to start in like a deficit,
Yeah.
which sometimes we're intentionally doing, but that's where it's going to bite you in the butt. Like as you get more tired and your body gets hunger and it's like begging for that food, it's
Yeah.
going to feel more and more out of control.
Yep.
Which I hear in this shape of like afternoon, like snack cravings for like chips or like candy, and then like after dinner, not being able to stop eating because like
Yeah.
your body literally doesn't care
So
that you've had
more.
dinner. It's like, please keep feeding me because I'm hungry.
Yeah.
And then it like when you do that every single day,
Yeah.
it's just going to become a pattern.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that myself.
Yeah. For sure.
So, oh, go ahead.
No. I was going to say just like a further along, which we may not be there yet. I was going to talk about how like sometimes honoring your hunger means like eating, like intuitive eating can also be like even when you're not hungry, but I think the example in the book was like, say you're going to like a play and it's from 7 to 10 and dinner is at 6 and you're not hungry at 6, but like, would you really sit at the restaurant with your friends and not eat dinner at 6 because you're not hungry, just to let your hunger roll around at 7 or 8 and then you're starving mid play and then haven't eaten, and then like come 10:30, 11 when you get home, you're ravenous and you're like binging on whatever you can find because you didn't allow yourself to eat at 6 o'clock.
Yeah. So basically, like, if you know you're not going to be able to eat and you have an opportunity to eat now, like, in the future, like, that is, I would say, very disordered to not allow yourself to fuel when you have the time. And that sucks because, like, we're talking all about this hunger, listen to your hunger. And then it's like, drop this bombshell of, oh, yeah, like, also, if you can't eat when you're going to get hungry, you should eat something before. But unfortunately, this is not like a nice and easy, like it is easy, like inherently, but like unlearning to like come back to your body. That's where you have to like bring your body knowledge and your brain knowledge together. And that's a really cool thing I think about being human is like we can forecast I'm probably going to get hungry at dinner time, which is 7 in this example, but I'm at dinner at 6, so I better eat.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to be a lost cause.
Yeah.
And you're not wrong or bad for binging, but like we do want to keep our blood sugar levels stable as much as possible for like optimal functioning and like energy levels. And then also like the guilt and shame that can come with a binge. And then, even outside of binge eating disorder, it's just like that's something that just sucks to go through. And it can really create those patterns of restricting and then binging. After that. So basically eat in regular increments throughout the day, every like 2 to 4 hours, no more than 5. Utilize some kind of journal to write down how you feel before, during, and after meals, to get more of that information. And then if you can, on top of that, add your scale, like 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, however you want to do it, your hunger. And what sensations are you really feeling in your body, and just start to observe, just become an observer of yourself, and give yourself grace in the process, because there's no wrong way to do it other than to not eat. That's the only way you can be wrong here. And then also remember, we need to have flexibility in being able to eat outside of times when we're physically hungry. Oh, also emotional hunger. We should probably touch on that, because a lot of celebrations or just like random times where someone may bring a food you really love, like, I don't know, bring some kind of pastry to the office in the morning, and it's like that has some kind of connection for you, or like you've had a rough day and you want a bowl of ice cream because you're feeling stressed. Like, if that again is not your only coping mechanism or only thing for emotional support, that's totally like healthy and normal to do. But it would be really disordered to say, I'm not saying you can never turn something down, because when we're a true intuitive eater, I think like we can pretty quickly scan ourselves and like know if we want something or not, just for whatever reason. But like, if it's your favorite food in the world, that is only available every like once a year, maybe, you wouldn't turn that down because you're not hungry. And if you did, unless it was like following a meal or something, like, you know, just an average example would be, if you're turning that down, that's a disordered behavior. Because you can be hungry emotionally. So that's something else I really love about intuitive eating, is like recognizing that there's more parts to us than just like our stomachs that tell us what we need. Like, it is also like heart and soul food, and like our culture, and just being like aware of the fact that we have a schedule that may not coincide perfectly with the exact point on our scale where we would love to be eating, and just practicing that. And it gets so much easier with time. So you're not like broken if this sounds like overwhelming, or just like
it takes time.
So I think that's all that I have on honoring hunger.
Me too.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, we're super stoked to be back, and continuing this series on intuitive eating. And we also will probably be a lot more present on Instagram now that we're back before we take our holiday break. So for a little bit, and then into 2021. So thanks so much for listening. You can find us on our joint Instagram page at Fit Fueled Free. You can keep up with Jenna at Jenna Up Fit, and my personal page is Dietitian Dani Cast. And we always appreciate ratings and reviews. Subscribe to us. We're pretty much available on any place you can listen to a podcast at this point. And also, we post our recordings on YouTube. So we love you guys, and hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.